I'm a 24-year-old guy who inherited my late mom's house a couple of years ago. She passed away unexpectedly, and while dealing with that loss was tough, one of the few things that gave me comfort was knowing she left her house to me. It wasn't just a house to her, it was our home. Every corner of it held memories of her, and it's where I plan to keep building my life. About 2 years after she passed, my dad remarried. He met Diane at a community event, and things moved pretty fast between them. Before I knew it, she and her two teenage kids were moving into the house. Diane was in her early 40s and had this way of acting like she belonged anywhere she went, even if it wasn't hers. Her kids, let's call them Logan and Emma, were around 15 and 17. They weren't bad at first, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. At first, I tried to be open-minded. I thought, hey, maybe this could work. But almost immediately, there was tension. Diane acted like moving in meant she had some kind of say over the place. She started redecorating without asking, like rearranging furniture or bringing in things that didn't fit the vibe of the house at all. She even replaced a couple of framed pictures of my mom with generic artwork, which rubbed me the wrong way. But the tipping point came when I realized some of my mom's sentimental items, like a vase she loved and a few old photo albums, had disappeared. Diane shrugged it off, saying it's just clutter, and acted like I was overreacting. Meanwhile, my dad was trying to play mediator, but he always ended up siding with Diane. He'd tell me to be more flexible or try to see things from her perspective. I wasn't sure what perspective he wanted me to see. This was my house. My name was on the deed, not his, not hers. I even reminded him that before Mom passed, she made it clear this house would be mine. He had agreed back then not to contest it. Now it seemed like he had conveniently forgotten that promise. Logan and Emma didn't help the situation. They treated the house like their personal playground. They'd leave their stuff everywhere, eat in the living room and leave crumbs on the couch, blast music late at night, and act like I was a roommate they didn't have to respect. One time, Logan took my gaming console into his room without asking, and when I confronted him about it, he acted like it wasn't a big deal. Diane brushed it off with a boys will be boys kind of attitude. That kind of thing happened a lot. The situation hit a breaking point a few weeks ago. Diane casually mentioned during dinner that she thought my bedroom would make a great study space for Logan and Emma to do their schoolwork. She suggested I move into the smaller guest room. It wasn't even framed as a question. It was like she was informing me of a decision she'd already made. I stared at her for a good 10 seconds before I said, no, that's not happening. She didn't take it well. The argument that followed was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Diane accused me of being selfish and not thinking about the family. My dad chimed in, saying I needed to compromise to keep the peace. I pointed out that this wasn't about peace, it was about boundaries, and she was stomping all over mine. But they both kept pushing, acting like I was the unreasonable one. After that, I started locking my bedroom door whenever I left the house, just in case. When I vented about all this to my friends, they were unanimously on my side. They told me to stand my ground and not let Diane take over. One of them even suggested changing the locks, which I seriously started considering. I wasn't worried about my legal standing. I had all the paperwork proving the house was mine, deed, inheritance documents, everything. But dealing with the constant drama was exhausting. Diane didn't stop there, though. She started telling extended family members that I was being ungrateful and refusing to share family property. It was a bold move, considering she'd only been married to my dad for about 2 years and had contributed nothing to this house. I got a few texts from relatives who'd clearly only heard her side of the story, asking why I couldn't just be more accommodating. That made me even more determined not to budge. A few days later, Diane ambushed me in the kitchen with what she called a solution. She wanted me to either move out entirely or agree to give her equal say over decisions about the house. I couldn't believe the audacity. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that neither of those things was going to happen. She stormed off, and I could hear her complaining to my dad about how I was ruining the family dynamic. That night, I started preparing for what I knew was going to be a long, messy battle. Diane clearly wasn't going to back down, and my dad was too wrapped around her finger to see reason. If she wanted a fight over this house, I was ready to give her one. Update 1. The first major blow came one evening after work. I got home around 6 p.m., ready to unwind, only to find my key didn't work in the lock. At first, I thought maybe something was wrong with the lock itself, so I tried again. No luck. After a few minutes of fiddling, I knocked on the door. It took a while, but Diane eventually opened it, acting surprised to see me. She casually mentioned that she'd changed the locks earlier in the day and forgot to give me a key. I stepped inside, trying to process what had just happened. Before I could even bring it up, my dad walked in from the kitchen and immediately jumped to Diane's defense. He said it wasn't a big deal and that I could sort it out tomorrow. I couldn't believe it. My house. My locks. And they didn't even think I needed to know about it beforehand? With no immediate solution, I called a friend and asked if I could crash at their place for the night. Thankfully, they were more than happy to help. As I packed an overnight bag, I noticed some of my stuff had been moved around. My gaming console, a few books, even some framed photos were nowhere to be seen. Diane must have been at it again. I didn't confront her that night, but I knew this wasn't something I could let slide. The next morning, I made 2 important stops. First, I met with a locksmith to schedule a lock change of my own. Then, I headed straight to a lawyer's office to ensure all my paperwork was in order. The lawyer confirmed that the deed and inheritance documents were rock solid. More importantly, they assured me I could take legal action if I needed to remove anyone who wasn't respecting my ownership. Hearing that gave me the clarity I needed to push back. While all this was happening, Diane was already stirring the pot with extended family. By the time I got home that evening, my phone was blowing up with texts and missed calls. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly experts on my selfishness and inability to share family property. It was clear Diane had been working overtime to paint me as the bad guy. One aunt even accused me of trying to throw my own father out on the street. The irony of it all was exhausting. A couple of days later, Diane dropped another bombshell. Over dinner, she made an offhand comment about how she and my dad were in financial trouble and might need to refinance the house. I nearly choked on my food. The house wasn't even in their name, and they thought refinancing it was an option? When I pointed this out, Diane just shrugged, saying they had to explore all possibilities. It was like she'd convinced herself she had a stake in it just by living there. Meanwhile, Logan and Emma had taken things to a whole new level. They started acting like I was a guest in my own home, using my things without asking and treating my space like it was theirs. One afternoon, I came back to find Logan lounging in my bedroom, scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. Emma had borrowed one of my jackets and left it crumpled in a corner of the living room. Diane, of course, acted like none of this was a big deal. That was the last straw. The next morning, I had the locks changed without telling anyone. When Diane got home later that day and realized what I'd done, she exploded. She accused me of being petty and ungrateful, and my dad quickly jumped in, demanding I apologize. He even threatened to move out if I didn't agree to family harmony. I told them both that the locks weren't up for discussion. Frustrated, I turned to Reddit for advice, posting about the whole situation. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. People encouraged me to stand my ground, reminded me that legal ownership was on my side, and shared similar stories about dealing with manipulative family members. It was the validation I needed. Diane wasn't done, though. She started telling anyone who'd listen that I was abusive and controlling, twisting every situation to make herself the victim. Then, one afternoon, her relatives showed up unannounced, claiming they were there to talk sense into me. When I asked them to leave, they refused, so I had no choice but to call the police. Watching them get escorted off the property was satisfying, but it also showed me just how far Diane was willing to go. Logan and Emma weren't happy either. They complained loudly about how my refusal to budge was ruining their lives. Diane encouraged this narrative, acting like my boundaries were some kind of personal attack on her family. To put an end to the constant back and forth, I finally pulled out the deed and inheritance paperwork, laying it all out in front of them. Diane didn't take it well. She accused me of being heartless and manipulative, storming out of the room in a full-blown meltdown. My dad just sat there, looking uncomfortable but not saying much. It was clear that the lines had been drawn, and neither side was backing down anytime soon. Update 2. The next step was clear. I had to make things official. After the scene with Diane's relatives showing up in her constant attempts to undermine me, I contacted my lawyer again. Together, we drafted a formal letter demanding that Diane and her kids vacate the house within 30 days. It wasn't a move I made lightly, but at this point, there was no other option. The house was legally mine, and I wasn't going to let her continue walking all over me. The letter went out, and things escalated almost immediately. My dad called me the same evening. He was furious, claiming I was tearing the family apart. He went on about how Diane and her kids had nowhere else to go and accused me of being heartless. I calmly reminded him that this was my house, left to me by my mom, and Diane had been crossing boundaries from the start. But he wasn't having it. He ended the call by saying I needed to reconsider or face the consequences of my actions. Meanwhile, Diane wasn't just stirring up drama within the family anymore. She started talking to the neighbors, spinning a story about how I was throwing her out and treating her and her kids unfairly. I overheard one neighbor mention Diane's sob story about how she thought she was part of the family only to be betrayed. It was frustrating, but I knew I couldn't waste energy on every lie she told. Surprisingly, not all the family bought Diane's narrative. A couple of relatives reached out to say they supported my decision. One cousin even shared a story about Diane trying to manipulate her during a family gathering, so she wasn't surprised by what was happening. It was nice to know not everyone had fallen for Diane's act, though the majority still seemed to be on her side. While Diane worked to control the narrative, Logan and Emma decided to ramp up their behavior. They started leaving messes everywhere, dirty dishes in the living room, wrappers on the floor, and laundry piled up in the hallway. One day, Logan accidentally knocked over a decorative vase I'd inherited from my mom, shattering it. Diane shrugged it off, saying it was bound to happen with so many people living in one space. It was blatant sabotage, but I kept my cool. Dad's next move was predictable. He gave me another ultimatum: let Diane and the kids stay, or he'd leave with them. He framed it as a choice between family unity and selfishness, but by now, I was done with his guilt trips. I told him if he wanted to leave, he was free to do so. That conversation didn't end well, and I didn't hear from him for a few days after. The eviction notice was served the following week. Diane's reaction was explosive. She threatened to sue me for emotional damages, claiming that the stress of the situation was affecting her health. My lawyer wasn't concerned. The case was weak, but it was clear Diane wasn't going to leave quietly. I updated Reddit with everything that had happened, and once again, the support poured in. People shared legal advice, and even similar stories of dealing with toxic family dynamics. It was reassuring to know I wasn't alone in this. Then, things took a bizarre turn. One weekend, while I was out running errands, Diane decided to host a moving sale in the front yard. She started selling off items she didn't even own, including some of my mom's belongings. A neighbor tipped me off, and I raced home to stop it. I called the police, and when they arrived, Diane tried to play the victim again, claiming she had my permission. Thankfully, I had proof otherwise. The officers shut down the sale, and nothing significant was lost, but the incident left me shaken. Shortly after that, Logan and Emma were sent to live with their biological father. Diane must have realized that their behavior was making things worse, or maybe their dad stepped in. Either way, the house was quieter without them around. But Diane and my dad were still there, and they weren't making things easy. One night, Dad came to me with tears in his eyes. He begged me to reconsider, saying Diane was under a lot of pressure and just needed more time to figure things out. He talked about how much he loved her and how he couldn't bear to see her struggle. It was a heartbreaking moment, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I told him the decision was final. A court hearing was scheduled shortly after Diane followed through on her threat to sue me. My lawyer was confident the case wouldn't hold up, but it was still another layer of stress to deal with. I started focusing more on asserting my boundaries and making sure I had everything documented. The lawsuit felt more like a delay tactic than anything else, but I wasn't going to let it shake me. Through all this, I noticed a change in myself. I was no longer hesitant to stand up for what was right. The emotional toll was heavy, but I felt stronger and more confident with every step I took. I hinted in my next Reddit update that things were about to take a surprising turn, but I didn't give away too much. For now, I was focused on getting through the legal mess and finally reclaiming my home. Update 3. Diane's next move was predictable but no less frustrating. She officially filed a lawsuit claiming she was promised partial ownership of the house by my dad. According to her, the agreement was verbal and made during their marriage. The claim was flimsy at best, but it was enough to drag me into a legal battle. My lawyer reviewed the filing and assured me the case wouldn't hold up in court, but it would still take time and resources to resolve. While we prepared for the hearing, more lies from Diane began surfacing. Apparently, she'd been telling extended family members and even some neighbors that she co-owned the house and had funded major renovations. None of this was true, of course, but the rumors caused enough confusion that I started getting calls from relatives demanding to know why I was trying to push her out of her own property. The irony was almost laughable. At one point, I confronted my dad about the lawsuit, asking if he'd known anything about it. He admitted that Diane had pressured him into agreeing with her version of events, saying he didn't know how to stop her. Hearing that was infuriating. He had a chance to stop this mess before it started, and instead he just went along with her lies. His lack of backbone was becoming harder to ignore. Diane wasn't just relying on family drama to build her case. She also took the fight online, starting a social media campaign painting herself as a victim. Posts began popping up accusing me of elder abuse and financial manipulation, complete with vague stories about how she'd sacrificed everything for the family only to be betrayed. It was surreal seeing strangers comment on posts about me, calling me a monster when they didn't even know the full story. To counter Diane's antics, my lawyer filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation. This took her by surprise, and for the first time she seemed genuinely rattled. Around the same time, an unexpected ally came forward, an old family friend who knew Diane from her past. They provided evidence showing that Diane had a history of manipulating people for financial gain, including a prior relationship where she'd tried something similar. This was a huge win for my case. Things started to shift when Diane's kids, Logan and Emma, began questioning her. With them living at their biological dad's house, they were less influenced by Diane's daily manipulations. Word got back to me that Logan had outright asked her why her stories didn't add up. Diane's narrative was starting to crumble, even within her own family. When the court hearing finally began, Diane went all in on her victim act. She claimed she'd been misled into believing the house was a marital asset and that she had every right to a share of it. She tried to come across as a loving stepmother who only wanted what was fair. My lawyer, however, dismantled her arguments piece by piece. We presented the deed, my mother's will, and detailed financial records, showing that Diane had contributed nothing to the property. Under cross-examination, Diane's web of lies started to unravel. She stumbled over her words when asked about the supposed renovations she'd funded, eventually admitting there were none. When pressed further, she conceded she had no legal claim to the house. It was a humiliating moment for her, and a pivotal one for me. The judge dismissed Diane's case, ruling in my favor and ordering her to pay my legal fees. It was a decisive victory that sent a clear message: her manipulations wouldn't work here. News of the court ruling spread quickly through the family, and many relatives who had sided with Diane began to distance themselves from her. Some even apologized to me for believing her lies. Despite the legal loss, my dad still refused to leave Diane. He expressed regret for not standing up to her but insisted he couldn't abandon her now. This strained our relationship even further. I told him I needed space, and we've barely spoken since. With the legal battle over, I finally had some breathing room. But the emotional toll of everything hit harder than I expected. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt tainted by all the drama. Still, I was determined to reclaim it and move forward. In my latest Reddit update, I hinted at a major decision I was considering about my relationship with my dad and Diane. For now, though, I was just relieved to have won the case and taken back control of my home. Update 4. After the court ruling, I thought things would finally calm down. I was wrong. Diane outright refused to leave the house, claiming she had nowhere else to go. Even with the judge's decision against her and the legal fees she now owed, she acted like none of it mattered. My lawyer advised me to start formal eviction proceedings, so I filed the necessary paperwork, which gave her a final move-out deadline. Not long after, my dad pulled me aside to plead Diane's case. He asked me to let her stay just a little longer so she could figure things out. I reminded him that this wasn't just about her overstaying her welcome. It was about how she'd treated me and the house for months. Her behavior had gone far beyond what anyone could consider reasonable. He didn't have much of a response but kept pushing for leniency. I stood firm. In the meantime, Diane sent Logan and Emma to live with their biological father permanently. This left her more isolated in the house, which seemed to make her even more determined to dig in her heels. She started claiming the stress from the situation was making her sick. At one point, she staged a fainting episode in the living room, insisting she needed rest and stability. My dad rushed to her side, but I wasn't convinced. She hadn't shown any signs of illness before, and the timing was suspicious. Then came another round of police involvement. Diane called them, alleging I was harassing her and making the house unlivable. When the officers arrived, I calmly showed them the court documents and explained the situation. They quickly saw through her claims and left after giving her a warning not to misuse emergency services. It was another desperate attempt to stall the inevitable. The final eviction day came, and Diane didn't leave quietly. That morning, she dragged her belongings out onto the front lawn, yelling about how she was being thrown out on the street with nowhere to go. A small crowd of neighbors gathered to watch, some recording the scene on their phones. It was chaotic and embarrassing, but I stayed inside, letting her theatrics play out. By the afternoon, Diane and my dad were gone, and the neighborhood was buzzing about the incident. Later, I found out the videos had gone viral, with most people siding with me once they heard the full story. My dad made good on his earlier ultimatum and moved out with Diane. He didn't even try to convince me again. I think he realized it was a lost cause. Still, it was hard to see him leave, even if it was his choice to stand by her. Our relationship, already strained, felt more fractured than ever. With Diane gone, I started the long process of reclaiming my home. The house was a mess. Rooms were cluttered with her leftover junk, and some of my mom's sentimental items were either missing or damaged beyond repair. It took weeks to sort everything out, but with the help of a few friends, I finally began to make the place feel like mine again. I replaced what I could, rearranged furniture, and even repainted a few rooms to create a fresh start. To help process everything, I started therapy. The emotional toll of the entire ordeal was heavier than I'd realized. Therapy helped me set boundaries, not just for my dad and Diane, but for all future relationships. I needed to protect myself from getting dragged into toxic situations like this again. The family, unsurprisingly, remained divided. Some relatives still blame me for the fallout, claiming I should have been more accommodating. Others, however, reached out in support. Diane's ex-husband, of all people, contacted me to share his own experiences with her manipulative tendencies. He even apologized on behalf of Logan and Emma, saying he'd encourage them to reflect on their behavior. A few weeks later, Logan and Emma reached out themselves. They apologized for how they'd acted, admitting they'd been caught up in their mom's narrative. It wasn't an emotional reunion or anything, but it felt like closure. At least they were starting to see things more clearly. Even my dad eventually reached out, asking if we could reconcile. He said he regretted not standing up to Diane sooner and wanted to fix our relationship. I told him I needed time. His decision to stick by Diane for so long had damaged our bond in ways that wouldn't heal overnight. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life completely, but I left the door open for the future. Now, with the house finally mine again and the drama behind me, I'm focused on rebuilding. I've started making plans for the future, renovations, a garden project my mom always wanted, and even hosting a housewarming party for the friends who supported me through all this. For the first time in months, I can finally say there's peace in my home. It feels good to look ahead without Diane's toxic influence clouding everything. Update 5. After Diane's dramatic exit, I decided it was time to completely cut ties. I blocked her on every platform, phone, social media, everything. I wasn't going to give her any more chances to manipulate or interfere in my life. For me, Diane no longer existed. My lawyer handled any residual communication about her unpaid legal fees, but I stayed far removed from it. My dad, however, didn't make things easy. He started reaching out more frequently, wanting to repair our relationship. While I appreciated his efforts, he was still with Diane, which kept things strained. He didn't understand, or refused to accept, that as long as he chose to stay with her, I couldn't fully trust him. Every conversation we had eventually circled back to Diane, so I limited our interactions to surface-level updates and polite exchanges. With the house finally mine again, I dove headfirst into reclaiming it. The first step was a major renovation project. I replaced the damaged floors in the living room, repainted the walls, and started working on the garden my mom had always dreamed of. The process felt therapeutic, like I was restoring not just the house but also the peace it used to represent. The neighbors, many of whom had witnessed Diane's antics firsthand, rallied around me. A few even showed up unannounced to offer help with the renovations. One neighbor, who'd recorded Diane's meltdown on the lawn, told me the video had gone viral. People online overwhelmingly sided with me, with comments calling Diane's behavior ridiculous and applauding my patience for putting up with her as long as I did. While I didn't pay too much attention to the online chatter, it was validating to know others saw her for who she really was. In the middle of the renovations, a distant relative reached out with an unexpected offer. They wanted to buy the house for a high price, claiming it would be a great investment property. While the offer was tempting, I declined. This house wasn't just a financial asset, it was my mom's legacy. No amount of money could replace the sentimental value it held for me. Not all family interactions were positive, though. Some relatives still sided with Diane and continued to badmouth me. They clung to the idea that I'd been too harsh and should have let her stay longer. Their complaints didn't carry much weight, though. The truth about Diane's behavior was becoming more widely known, and their influence was waning. On the brighter side, I reconnected with a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. They'd gone through something similar with a toxic step-parent situation and reached out after hearing about my ordeal. Sharing our experiences brought us closer, and we've stayed in touch ever since. It was nice to have someone who truly understood what I'd been through. Through mutual acquaintances, I started hearing about Diane's post-eviction life. She was struggling financially, unable to maintain the lifestyle she'd been used to while living in my house. Many of the family members who initially supported her had distanced themselves after the court case, realizing the extent of her lies. It wasn't something I took pleasure in, but it was a reminder of why I'd stood my ground in the first place. There were also rumors that my dad was reconsidering his loyalty to Diane. A mutual friend mentioned he'd been hinting at the possibility of separating from her, though nothing was confirmed. I decided not to get involved. Whatever he chose to do was his business, and I wasn't going to let it affect me anymore. Meanwhile, Logan and Emma seemed to be thriving with their biological father. I occasionally heard updates through their dad, who'd kept in touch since Diane's departure. Both kids were doing well in school and seemed to have adjusted to their new environment. Knowing they were on a better path gave me a sense of closure. They'd been caught in Diane's web of manipulation, and now they had a chance to break free from it. Looking back, this entire ordeal taught me a lot about the importance of clear legal documentation and firm boundaries. Without my mom's careful planning and the inheritance paperwork, things could have turned out very differently. I started encouraging friends and family to make sure their affairs were in order, sharing my story as a cautionary tale. Therapy helped me process the emotional weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about standing my ground, it was about learning to move forward without carrying the resentment and hurt with me. Over time, I reached a point of emotional closure. I was proud of myself for handling such a tough situation and coming out stronger on the other side. As a final chapter to this saga, I shared a post on Reddit thanking everyone for their advice and support throughout the ordeal. The community had been a lifeline during some of the most challenging moments, and it felt right to close the loop with them. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many people saying they'd been rooting for me since the beginning. Now, I'm looking ahead. The house is nearly fully renovated, and I'm planning a housewarming party to celebrate this new chapter. It's not just about the house, it's about reclaiming my life and creating a space that truly feels like home. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future, and I'm ready to leave the drama behind for good. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my older sister Laura 35 Hef has been the self-proclaimed queen of family holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, you name it, she hosted it. She always made it seem like she was doing everyone a favor, saying she loved bringing the family together, and for years, everyone just went along with it. At first, I didn't mind. I was the youngest sibling, and honestly, it was nice not having to worry about planning or cooking. I'd just show up, eat, and enjoy the holiday like everyone else. Laura made hosting look effortless, like she thrived on it. But over time, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Every single event had strict rules, seating charts, dress codes for family photos, and an itinerary as if we were attending a corporate retreat, not a family gathering. If you were late, expect a passive-aggressive comment. If you brought a dish that wasn't pre-approved by her, it would mysteriously get forgotten in the fridge. She micromanaged everything to the point where it felt less like a celebration and more like we were extras in a performance starring her. And then there was the money issue. Laura never directly asked for money, but somehow, we all ended up paying for everything. She'd send out a list of expenses beforehand, food, drinks, decorations, and we'd all chip in. But looking back, I realized that despite all of us contributing, Laura never actually seemed to pay for anything herself. She'd always claimed she had already covered certain things and just needed us to even it out. No one questioned it. It was easier to just send her money than argue. Then there was the annual Secret Santa, which Laura insisted on organizing. Over the years, we started noticing a pattern. Laura always seemed to end up with the nicest gift. It wasn't just a fluke. Whenever she organized the Secret Santa, the person who drew her name somehow had the highest budget. Meanwhile, the rest of us often received cheap, last-minute gifts. At first, we chalked it up to bad luck. But after reviewing past years, it was impossible to ignore. She had been rigging it in her favor all along. At first, I chalked it up to bad luck, but after years of the same pattern, I started getting suspicious. Another thing that stood out was how she always had non-family guests at these events, usually friends or coworkers she was trying to impress. It was never just a casual, oh, they didn't have anywhere to go. No, it was always people she wanted to show off to, and she made sure they saw her in the best light. But the real tipping point for me happened last Christmas. We had all contributed money for groceries, and as usual, Laura handled the shopping. Dinner came and went. Everything seemed normal. But later that night, while helping clean up, I saw her stuffing leftover food into containers, expensive cuts of meat, unopened bottles of wine, entire trays of sides, and quietly loading them into her car. At first, I thought maybe she was just taking her fair share. But something felt off, so I kept an eye on her. The next morning, while throwing away some trash, I found a crumpled receipt near the kitchen counter. It showed purchases that never actually made it to the dinner table. The wine, paid for by the family, but not served. The meat, bought with our money, but a smaller, cheaper portion was actually cooked. It was clear, Laura had been pocketing the difference. It all started clicking into place. I remembered a cousin joking at Thanksgiving about how Laura always seemed to walk away with more than she brought. I remembered how defensive she got when I once suggested we start tracking costs more evenly. And now, standing there with that receipt in my hand, I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. She had been doing this for years. I decided to test a theory. For the next holiday, I planned to track everything. Every contribution, every receipt, every expense. I wasn't going to accuse her without proof, but I needed to know how deep this went. So for Christmas, I made a secret plan. I kept notes on who contributed what, checked what actually made it to the table, and even casually asked Laura about some of the purchases. She got defensive every time, quick to brush off questions or change the subject. And then, just a few days before Christmas, she sent a message in the family group chat. Hey everyone, just a small thing. Costs were a little higher than expected this year, so if everyone could send an extra $50, that'd be great. Thanks. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just imagining things, she had been scamming us all along, and this year, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. A week before Christmas, Laura dropped her usual Secret Santa assignments in the family group chat. Every year she insisted on organizing it, saying she wanted to make sure everything was even and fair. But this time, something stood out. The budget was different. Normally we set a $50 limit per person. This year, according to Laura, things were a little tight for some people, so the budget was adjusted accordingly. The catch? Everyone else had a $40 limit, except for whoever got Laura's name. That person's budget? $100. I checked my messages from last year. Same pattern. 2 years ago? Same thing. It was clear. Laura had been quietly rigging Secret Santa to make sure she always got the most expensive gift. At the same time, she sent out the breakdown for Christmas dinner costs. According to her, she had already covered over half the groceries and decorations, so the rest of us just needed to send her our portions. Except I knew for a fact she hadn't bought half the things she claimed. I brought it up casually to Mom, mentioning how Laura seemed to always be reimbursed more than she actually spent. Mom barely looked up from what she was doing and just said, "That's just how she is," like it was normal. Like we were all just supposed to accept it. That night, I called my brother. We started comparing notes, going back over past holidays. The patterns lined up. Every year, Laura handled the money. Every year, she came out ahead, and every year she assigned herself the easiest tasks, decorating and coordinating while dumping all the actual work on the rest of us. The day before Christmas, things escalated. Out of nowhere, Laura announced in the family chat that there were unexpected costs and everyone needed to chip in an extra $50. No explanation. Just a quick thanks at the end of the message. I didn't send a cent. Instead, I decided to track exactly what she was spending and where the money was going. That night, my brother and I went through the kitchen, checking the fridge and pantry. A lot of the expensive groceries we had supposedly paid for were missing. Certain bottles of wine, premium cuts of meat, gone. But sitting in the garage, extra bags of groceries she hadn't mentioned. Stuff she had clearly bought with our money, but never planned to serve at dinner. In the family group chat, a cousin made a joke about how Laura had the easiest job every year while everyone else did the heavy lifting. It was a simple comment, nothing serious, but Laura lost it. She went on a full rant about how no one appreciates her hard work, and how she carried this family year after year. That she was losing money making sure we had a perfect holiday. That she sacrificed so much and all we did was complain. It was a performance, and I had proof it was a lie. I pulled my brother and cousin aside and told them everything. The grocery bags, the receipts, the Secret Santa scam. We agreed. After dinner, we were going to confront her. But Laura must have sensed something was off, because just before dinner, she suddenly remembered she had forgotten to buy a major dish. Instead of handling it herself, she sent me to the store to get it. I was gone for maybe 20 minutes. When I got back, I walked into the dining room and saw her standing off to the side, opening a bottle of wine. It was one of the bottles I had paid for. Not just any wine. Either, it was a $60 bottle she had told us was too expensive to serve. Meanwhile, everyone else was drinking the cheap off-brand wine she had set out. She saw me looking at her, and for a split second, she froze. Then, without missing a beat, she smiled, held up her glass and said, "Merry Christmas." That was it. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a little holiday stress or poor planning. Laura had been scamming us for years, and this time she wasn't going to get away with it. Dinner had barely ended when I pulled my parents, my brother, and a few other family members into the living room. Plates were still on the table, and people were lingering in the kitchen, but I wasn't about to wait until Laura had the chance to manipulate the situation. I laid everything out, the receipts that didn't match the groceries on the table, the missing food and wine, the inflated Secret Santa budget, the last-minute unexpected costs she demanded from everyone. Laura barely let me finish before she cut in. She looked around the room like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Shocked. Hands up, eyes wide, completely offended at the mere suggestion that she had been pocketing money for years. She pointed at the beautifully decorated table, at the lights she had strung up outside, at the matching place settings. She carried these holidays, she reminded everyone. She did the work, she put in the effort, and I was sitting here accusing her of what? Stealing from her own family? On Christmas, I didn't even have to say anything. My brother stepped in, he went over everything with cold, hard facts. How she always made sure to take home the most expensive leftovers. How she always ended up with the priciest Secret Santa gift. How, when we added up all the contributions over the years, she had been making hundreds of dollars off these holidays. The room went quiet. Laura's expression shifted. The dramatic outrage faded, replaced by a different approach, tears. Her voice got softer. She wasn't scamming us, she swore. She was just trying to make Christmas special. It was never about the money, it was about making sure everyone had a good experience. And now we were attacking her. For the first time, Mom didn't immediately jump to defend her. She stayed quiet, staring at the floor. Dad, who usually stayed out of this kind of thing, finally spoke up. He admitted he had noticed Laura taking extra food and drinks over the years, but never wanted to make a big deal out of it. But this was deliberate. Laura's face went red. She straightened up and pointed a finger at me and my brother. If we didn't trust her, she wouldn't host anymore. She expected a reaction, pleading, someone begging her to reconsider. Instead, my brother and I just nodded. Fine, we'll host next year. Laura's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She wasn't expecting that. Aunt Lisa, who had been watching the whole thing unfold, let out a small laugh. Not mocking, not mean, just relieved. Laura must have heard it, because her whole demeanor shifted again. Now it wasn't about betrayal, it was about image. We weren't just trying to take over, we were trying to make her look bad. She turned to the rest of the family, waiting for backup, someone to take her side. But no one did. People exchanged glances. An uncle shrugged. A cousin suddenly found her nails very interesting. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat, looking away. Laura's face went blank. She stood there for a few more seconds, waiting for anyone, to say something. When no one did, she turned on her heel, grabbed her coat, and walked straight out the door. She didn't even stay for dessert. The silence in the house after she left was heavy. No one really knew what to say. Some people looked at Mom, expecting her to smooth things over like she always did. But she didn't. She just quietly got up and started clearing plates. For the first time in years, no one was chasing after Laura, trying to calm her down. That should have been the end of it. But over the next few days, the family group chat exploded. Laura didn't come back to apologize. She didn't try to explain herself. Instead, she flooded the chat with passive-aggressive messages about how she was so done giving and never being appreciated. How she sacrificed her time, energy, and money for us, and we just turned on her. Then came the guilt trips. She wasn't even sure she wanted to come to family events anymore. She hoped we all enjoyed our cheap little Christmas next year without her. Nobody responded. Mom stayed silent in the chat. Though she looked unusually withdrawn at dinner that night. A week later, when I stopped by her house, she sighed and admitted something that had been weighing on her. I always had a feeling, she confessed, shaking her head. But every time I tried to say something, she'd turn it into a fight. It was just easier to let it go. The exhaustion in her voice made it clear, this wasn't a sudden realization, but something she had been battling with for years. I asked why she never said anything, and she just sighed.
It was easier that way.
But now even she was done. With Laura out of the picture, my brother and I started planning next year's holiday, and without her hosting, we realized something almost immediately. It was going to be so much cheaper, and for the first time in a long time, completely drama-free. After her dramatic exit from Christmas, Laura completely disappeared. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive comments in the family group chat. It was like she had vanished. No one went out of their way to check on her. By February, my brother and I were already planning Thanksgiving. Normally, it would have been an unspoken rule that Laura was hosting, but this time, we didn't wait for her to say anything. We put together a plan, sent out a message in the group chat, and within minutes, relatives started responding with excitement. Nobody even mentioned Laura. Then, a few weeks later, a vague Facebook post popped up on her timeline. Something about how some people will stab you in the back and act like they're doing you a favor. A few people liked it, but no one engaged. A few days after that, Mom got a call from Laura. This was the first time she had reached out since Christmas. But instead of apologizing or trying to mend things, she immediately launched into how my brother and I were ruining family traditions because we were jealous of her. Mom didn't react the way she expected. Instead of comforting her, Mom just calmly pointed out that Laura had been taking advantage of us for years. That shut her down. But Laura wasn't done. Over the next week, she started calling aunts and cousins, painting herself as the victim. She told them she had been humiliated on Christmas, that she had done nothing wrong, and that my brother and I were just power hungry and wanted to steal her role in the family. One of our cousins, fed up with Laura's dramatics, immediately called me and told me everything. She even sent me a screenshot of a text where Laura called me a cheap, ungrateful little brat. It was clear Laura wasn't going to let this go. Then, we found out about her new plan. My brother's wife overheard from a mutual friend that Laura had been planning something in secret. She was going to host her own Thanksgiving dinner, to prove a point and get people to choose her over us. We all acted like we had no idea. As the months passed, we continued planning like normal. The whole family was on board. There was no mention of Laura. No drama, no tension. Then, a week before Thanksgiving, she made her big move. She sent a mass text to everyone in the family. Hey everyone, can't wait to see you all at my place for Thanksgiving. Let me know what you're bringing. She didn't ask. She didn't check. She just assumed that at the last minute, everyone would drop our plans and run back to her. But nobody did. One by one, people started responding, "Oh, I'm actually going to brother's place this year. We already made plans with me and brother. Didn't realize you were hosting, sorry." Not a single person accepted. She waited a few hours before replying with a short cold "okay, have fun." But we weren't stupid. That same evening, another Facebook post popped up. "People don't appreciate real effort. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away." A few people commented generic things like "you're so right" and "stay strong," but nobody in the family reacted. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in years we had zero stress. No last-minute money grabs. No chaotic group chats. No controlling schedules or passive-aggressive remarks. Just good food and laughter.
Laura.
She didn't even text anyone that night. She had always made it seem like the holidays couldn't function without her, that she was the glue holding everything together. But the reality, no one missed her. At the end of the night, while everyone was sitting around, full and relaxed, one of our aunts let out a laugh and casually said, "I don't know why we didn't cut her out of hosting sooner." And that was the moment it hit. For the first time in years, our family actually enjoyed a holiday together. And Laura, she had played herself. After her failed Thanksgiving power move, Laura tried to act like she didn't care. A few days later, she posted on Facebook about how she had a relaxing Thanksgiving and how sometimes a quiet dinner alone is better than forced company. This was coming from the same person who had spent years making it seem like hosting was her life's purpose. Nobody in the family reacted to her post. No likes, no comments, just silence. A few weeks later, we all gathered for a cousin's birthday. It was the first time Laura had shown up to a family event since Christmas, and she walked in like nothing had happened. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't outright hostile either, just present. Then the passive-aggressive comments started. She made a casual remark about how she heard Thanksgiving was a little simple this year. Then she joked about how maybe she had just been too much for us. Mom shut it down fast. She smiled and said, "It was actually less stressful this year." Laura's face dropped. She tried a few more jabs throughout the night, but no one took the bait. No one argued, no one tried to explain themselves to her. They just nodded and moved on with their conversations. That's when things started going downhill for her. Without her usual holiday hosting income, Laura had to start budgeting for real. No more having the entire family pitch in for groceries, drinks, and decorations while she pocketed the extra money. Then came the borrowing requests. My brother got a random text from Laura asking if he could spot her for a bill. He ignored it. A week later, she sent another one, this time acting like it was no big deal and she'd pay him back ASAP. He still didn't respond. Then we noticed something else. The friends she had always invited to family holidays, people she was trying to impress, weren't around anymore. She wasn't hosting extravagant dinners anymore, so they had no reason to stick around. By the time Christmas rolled around, Laura was clearly struggling. We did our Secret Santa again, but this time, Laura wasn't the one organizing it. Everything was fair. No one got an expensive gift while others got dollar store junk. It ran smoothly. Laura showed up late and empty-handed. She forgot about the gift exchange, which was funny considering how obsessed she had been with it in the past. But when it came time to pass out gifts, she casually reached for one of the unclaimed presents, one meant for someone who couldn't make it. A cousin, who normally stayed out of drama, spoke up. "Laura, you didn't bring a gift, so you don't get one." The room went dead silent. Laura's face turned red. She looked around, waiting for someone to step in, waiting for Mom to defend her like she always did. No one said a word. That's when she lost it. She went off about how she was being excluded and how we were treating her like a criminal over a stupid gift. She tried making it seem like she had been wronged, like she was the victim. Instead of immediately storming out, Laura turned to my cousin, the one who had spoken up. "Oh, I see how it is now," she sneered. "You all just love ganging up on me." She let the silence drag, waiting for anyone to take her side. When no one did, her face darkened. "Fine, enjoy your cheap little Christmas without me." And with that, she grabbed her coat and left, slamming the door behind her. There was no awkward scrambling to comfort her, no one rushing to make things right, just silence. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, we sat with Mom and Dad, expecting the usual, "She's still" family speech. Instead, Mom sighed and admitted she had always known Laura was using the family for financial gain. She just hadn't wanted to cause tension. That was it. That was all she said. There was no defense, no attempt to guilt trip us into fixing things. For the first time ever, Mom didn't take Laura's side. My brother and I agreed. Laura was never taking over holidays again. And honestly, it felt like a weight had finally been lifted off the entire family. With New Year's Eve approaching, Laura made one last attempt to regain control. She sent a mass text to the family, inviting everyone to a small, intimate New Year's Eve gathering at her place. But she didn't stop there. She made a point to say that she was only inviting real family this time. It didn't take long for someone to call her out. A cousin immediately replied, "What do you mean by real family?" Silence. A minute later, the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. A few seconds later, Laura left the group chat altogether. No explanation, no follow-up, just a quiet exit. For a few days, nothing happened. Then, on the morning of December 30th, she sent another long-winded message, this time, only to Mom. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone, that everything had been a misunderstanding, that she missed us, and just wanted things to go back to normal. Mom didn't respond. No one did. Then she turned to Dad. She called him late that night, crying about how she had lost her family and didn't know how to fix it. She said she just wanted one more chance, that she wanted us to start over. Dad finally had enough. His response was simple: "You lost the family because you took advantage of us." Then he hung up. That was the last time any of us spoke to Laura directly. But it didn't stop there. A few days into the new year, one of my brother's friends, who had also been in Laura's circle, mentioned something interesting. Laura wasn't just cut off from us, she was completely alone. The fancy friends she used to impress? Gone. The people she once invited to our family holidays, they had moved on. Without her extravagant hosting and all expenses paid dinners, she had nothing to offer them anymore. Then she tried one last guilt trip. She called Mom, sobbing, said she was done with the family and that she was moving on with her life. Mom didn't beg, she didn't try to convince her to stay, she just said, "Okay, take care of yourself." And that was it. Laura must have realized that no one was chasing after her this time because, within days, she purged her social media. First, she posted a series of cryptic rants about fake family and how she had given everything to people who never appreciated her. Then, one by one, she deleted everyone, including Mom and Dad. Not blocked, just gone. No explanation, no message, nothing. And honestly, for the first time in years, our family finally had peace. No more awkward group chats, no more manipulative holiday scams, no more walking on eggshells to avoid setting Laura off. And the best part, without her financial manipulation, we actually enjoyed spending time together. There was no pressure, no drama, no one trying to use the family for their own gain. For the first time in a decade, the holidays finally felt like what they were supposed to be: a family gathering, not a business transaction. After wiping everyone from her social media, Laura completely disappeared from family gatherings. Even the events she used to force herself into, birthdays, small get-togethers, even casual Sunday dinners, she was nowhere to be found. And the crazy part, no one really missed her. Without her controlling everything, family events were actually fun. People started showing up earlier and staying later instead of slipping out as soon as possible. There was no tension, no fake smiles, no passive-aggressive comments. Then, one afternoon, my brother got a random DM from an old mutual friend. "Hey, is your sister okay? She's been acting really weird lately." That was the first time we heard anything about Laura in months. We asked around and found out that she had been reaching out to old acquaintances, spinning a wild story about how her entire family betrayed her for no reason. She played the victim, acting like she had been cast out just for trying to keep the family together. But the real problem, her money situation was finally catching up to her. Without her usual holiday manipulation, Laura's financial situation became strained. While she had a decent job, her spending habits had always been excessive. She had relied on family contributions to stretch her income, covering personal expenses under the guise of holiday costs. A cousin who still had her on Venmo noticed something interesting. Laura had started requesting small amounts of money from friends and acquaintances, often with vague explanations like "just till payday" or "you're a lifesaver." It was clear she wasn't managing her money well without the extra padding. Then, Mom did something unexpected. She started feeling guilty, even after everything. Even after years of Laura using her, Mom started talking about reaching out. Dad shut it down immediately. "She's always looking for someone to bail her out. Let her figure it out on her own." And then came the next bombshell. Through a distant relative, we found out Laura was struggling financially. She had fallen behind on rent, not immediately evicted but facing serious late fees. Without her usual holiday fund to pad her income, she was having to budget for the first time in years. Rather than cut expenses, though, she seemed to be grasping at straws, reaching out to old acquaintances, and even setting up a GoFundMe, spinning herself as a victim of family betrayal. She tried couch surfing with friends, but without her perfect hostess image, they weren't as eager to help as she expected. And then, the most embarrassing move yet. One day, a cousin sent us a GoFundMe link. It was Laura's. She had made a public fundraiser titled, "Help Me Rebuild After Family Betrayal." The description, a long dramatic story about how she had been abandoned by those she trusted most and was starting over from nothing. It was pathetic. And the worst part, nobody donated. The campaign sat at $0 for days before she quietly deleted it. Then, months later, after complete silence, my brother got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, hope you're doing well. Let's talk soon." It was Laura. He left her on read. Then, one night, she made one final attempt at getting attention. A dramatic Facebook post. Sometimes family is just a bunch of strangers you happen to grow up with. A year ago, people would have rushed to comment, offering support, asking if she was okay. This time, nothing. Not a single like, not a single comment. Laura had burned every bridge. And now, she was completely alone. Months passed, no texts, no surprise messages, nothing. It seemed like Laura had finally accepted that she was cut off. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up unannounced at my parents' house. It was a regular Sunday afternoon. Dad was watching TV, Mom was in the kitchen, and my brother and I were planning an upcoming family barbecue. The doorbell rang, Dad opened it. There she was. No warning, no prior contact. Just Laura, standing on the front step, and Mom let her in. Even after everything, even after months of peace, Mom still had a soft spot for her. Big mistake. Laura walked in like nothing had happened. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She put on her best remorseful act and said she just wanted to make things right. She went on about how she missed everyone, how the family wasn't the same without her, how she realized she might have taken things too far. At first, it almost seemed convincing. Then, not even 10 minutes into the conversation, her real motive slipped out. She looked at Mom and casually mentioned that she needed a place to stay for a while. Silence. Dad immediately shut it down. He didn't let her finish. Didn't even let her build up to her "woe is me" speech. You made your choices, Laura. We're not your safety net. And just like that, the act dropped. The tears started immediately. She went on about how she was struggling, how no one understands what she's going through, how family is supposed to help each other. Mom hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. For years, she had always stepped in to calm Laura down, to smooth things over. But now, she looked tired. "I don't know what you want me to say, Laura," she finally muttered, glancing at Dad. Her voice lacked its usual firmness, as if she was still wrestling with years of habit. But when Dad stood his ground, something shifted in her expression. Slowly she nodded. "We can't keep doing this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Laura started grasping at anything she could to gain sympathy. She said she wasn't actually evicted, lied that she had plenty of savings, lie, and that she just wanted to reconnect, another lie. Dad stood his ground. "We tried to reconnect. You just wanted to use us." That's when the outburst happened. Laura realized nobody was falling for it anymore, so she did what she always did. She lashed out. She screamed about how we were selfish and ungrateful for all the years she sacrificed for us, how she had given everything to the family and was thrown away like trash. Then came the most insane claim yet. She actually said we owed her money for all the holidays she hosted, that she should be reimbursed for all the costs she covered over the years. That was the final straw. Mom, who had always been too forgiving, too patient, too willing to let things slide, finally lost it. "You stole from us, Laura. You're not a victim." Laura froze. For a split second, it was like she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Then, like clockwork, she grabbed her purse, slammed the door, and stormed out. Again, but this time, no one cared. Nobody chased after her. Nobody tried to fix things. Mom, Dad, my brother, and I just sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then we all looked at each other and silently agreed. This was it. No more second chances. No more dramatic re-entries. Laura was officially out of our lives. As soon as she was out of the driveway, the block party began. My brother and I blocked her number immediately. Mom and Dad followed. For the first time in years, we had zero contact with Laura, and honestly, it was the most peaceful feeling in the world. A full year passed. No texts, no surprise visits, no last-minute guilt trips. Laura was completely gone. And honestly, life had never been better. Family gatherings became drama-free. There were no ridiculous group chats about who owed what. No one had to fight over money. No passive-aggressive comments. No forced seating charts. No controlling schedules. Just food, laughter, and actual quality time. Mom, who had always been the peacemaker, admitted one night while cleaning up after dinner that she wished she had set boundaries years ago. Laura never even attempted to reach out. Not once. We assumed she was still out there, but she had effectively removed herself from our lives. Then, one day, a distant cousin, one of the few people who still had her on social media, gave us an update. Laura had moved into a much smaller apartment and was living alone. That wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part? She had rebranded herself. Her new online presence was all about how she had cut off toxic family and was focusing on self-care. She even started a blog. The theme, independent living. She wrote about how she had escaped a controlling family and was finally living life on her own terms. Nobody cared. The blog had zero engagement. No likes, no comments, just long rambling posts about how she was better off alone. Meanwhile, our family was thriving. Without Laura siphoning money from every holiday, we were able to host more family gatherings. Everyone contributed equally. There were no more last-minute unexpected costs. No more disappearing groceries. No more unfair secret Santas. For the first time in forever, the gift exchange was actually fair. No one got stuck buying Laura luxury gifts while receiving dollar store trinkets in return. One night, as we sat around reminiscing, Mom finally admitted something. Looking back, it was obvious. Laura never seemed to enjoy the actual process of hosting. She didn't fuss over the recipes or get excited about decorating. It was the control she loved, the image she maintained, the admiration she soaked up, and of course the financial perks. She thrived on the performance of it all, not the act of bringing people together. And that was it. That was the truth. None of us had ever said out loud. She was never doing it for the family. She was doing it for control. Since cutting Laura off, the younger generation of our family actually grew closer. Our cousins started hanging out outside of holidays. The family group chat, once a stressful battlefield, became a place for jokes, random updates, and actual conversations. Then, one day, someone asked the big question: would we ever let Laura back in? Dad didn't even hesitate. She burned that bridge herself. That was the final word on the matter. A few months later, Laura made one last attempt at getting attention. A cryptic post, "People change, and that's okay." It was clearly aimed at us. But this time, nobody reacted, nobody reached out, nobody took the bait, and then, nothing. As Thanksgiving rolled around again, we all sat down, plates full, glasses raised, and toasted to something none of us had ever experienced before. The best holiday season we'd ever had, without Laura.